Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Across Border podcast. Today, we're discussing with Ștefan Cibian, the director of the Făgăraș Research Institute, a community level organization in Romania. Ștefan, thank you so much for coming and participating in this episode today of the Across Border podcast. I would like to start our discussion by discussing about local civic organizations and the work you're doing at the Făgăraș Research Institute. If you can give us several examples of research projects or projects. I know some of them, but most likely there are several others I don't know necessarily. How are they perceived in the society? Why are you doing this kind of initiatives in Făgăraș and not in other places in Romania? And thank you again for coming.
Tony, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very glad that we have the chance to discuss about all these aspects. Thank you for the question. Făgăraș is a small town in Brașov County, and it is even smaller than it used to be, so to say. Făgăraș used to have about 45,000 people in 1992. And now it has about 26,000 people. So we are talking about a community that experienced quite significant outmigration. And despite this decrease in population, I would say it's one of the quite active local communities in Romania. And it's been really fascinating to live in Făgăraș for the last couple of years and to see the community becoming more and more active. So let me maybe say a few words about the history of this civic activism in the region, and then I can move on to the Institute and how we are studying these aspects. So a mechanism that I think plays a crucial role in activating communities in Romania is the community foundations. Mm-hmm. We have 16 community foundations in Romania at the moment, one of them being in Făgăraș, the Țara Făgărașului Community Foundation. And this is basically a local organization that covers a certain region. Most of the community foundations in Romania cover one county. In Făgăraș, the community foundation covers a part of Brașov County.
Which is also historical region?
It's not quite the historical borders, but partially. Mm-hmm. Let's do it this way. This mechanism, what it does is to mobilize local resources and to give grants in the local community and also scholarships. So basically, we have a mechanism that, in my view, it gives local inhabitants, it gives people, in a sense, the confidence that they can change things around them. And I think that is very powerful, especially in a country that is moving from totalitarianism to democracy. And as we can see around, we have a lot of people who want to have a better life, and people want things to be better around. And many of these people also are ready to stand up and do something about it. So I think at this or in this process of transition, in a sense, from a totalitarian to a democratic society, such mechanisms that enable people to have impact with their resources, be it financial, time, expertise, that is extremely important. And I think the community foundations in Romania prove that such mechanisms are essential for rebuilding trust in local communities. So in Făgăraș, the community foundation started in 2013, and we have now 12 years of community foundation activity in the region, and it's really a wonderful experience. I often refer to it as seeing communities come back to life, because people do believe that they actually can do something, and they start doing things. And I think that's community life in a sense, and that's beautiful. So we're very fortunate to have this context. The Institute emerged basically in about 2017, 2018, after a few years of discussing about this idea. I'm partially from Făgăraș, so I've been discussing with colleagues and friends who are also researchers in various parts of the world, and we realized, in a sense, that there are communities where there is not so much research going on, like Făgăraș. And since we were researchers, we thought, okay, maybe we should do something about this. And that's what we did. We established the Institute. For me, as I come from the field of international development, this is particularly interesting and important because even in the academic literature, while knowledge disparities are recognized, there is not so much emphasis on the importance of knowledge disparities for development. There is much more focus on economic disparities and the digital divide and so on. So for me, in a sense, I also look at the Institute as a strategy, in a sense, or as an experiment in seeing what happens with the local community once more research starts to happen locally, and once various groups and people are more connected to research. So for us at the Institute, one of the key principles, well, we have two main principles, in a sense. One is interdisciplinarity, and the other one is exactly this connection to the community. So in a lot of our projects, we try to connect to local actors, the municipalities, civil society, primarily civil society so far, and also people interested in research, and we hope to increase the interest in research, using research for various basic assessments about the region, for taking decisions about what projects to do, what policies to make, and so on and so forth. One line of activity at the Institute, it has developed in multiple directions in the last years, but one line of activity focuses exactly on studying civil society and local communities. So we've been doing a few studies and articles around generally the development of civil society in Țara Făgărașului. We've been looking at how diaspora contributes to community development. We have looked obviously at what has happened during COVID and the mobilization of civil society, and also during the crisis generated by the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and the wave of migrants that Romania has experienced. So we've tried to contribute also at national level, in a sense. And we've been part of the mechanisms for managing the migration flows that were established once this challenge appeared. Then I think we also have quite a big interest in how local communities work. And I mean, it goes without saying that after a totalitarian period, local communities don't really work. In a sense, we don't really have processes. People have little trust in one another. We have a lack of basic skills that would enable people to be able to work together. So it's extremely difficult for local communities or people in local communities to actually come together and achieve something together. Even discuss something together. So I think that the level of violence, the level of emotional reactions, it's something that precludes a collective action, in a sense. Mm-hmm. And I think this, from my perspective at least, relates a lot to this lack of skills that a totalitarian regime obviously generates in relation to human rights and individual freedoms.
But is Țara Făgărașului a region which, for whatever reason, lacks even more the type of skills and the type of trust you're mentioning? Because you have several areas in Romania where we can see a revival. Like Cluj is one of them, right? Bucharest, all other cities. I'm not all the other. I mean, bigger cities, bigger urban centers in Romania. Is this happening also in the smaller communities like Țara Făgărașului, or the?
I think it's definitely not comparable in terms of scale, but I do think, at least in the Făgăraș town and region, there is a lot going on. I think people are starting to do things in a sense. But then the struggle to actually get something done is something that is very difficult and that actually puts a lot of people off. The initiative, I think, is there. Transforming that initiative in actually long-term impact is almost impossible at the moment from a systemic perspective, and maybe we can go in more details to unpack that. I do think it relates a lot to how we practice our fundamental freedoms. And I can give an example. Obviously, we have freedom of speech, but if we do not have basic training in building arguments, it is almost impossible to actually use your freedom of speech. In a sense, one would not be aware of errors of argumentation. One would not probably have the patience to listen to somebody else having a different opinion. One would not know how to bring evidence to support opinions. One would be extremely attached to the ideas that one has. And I think all these challenges would lead basically to violence, in a sense, verbal or emotional violence in the best cases. Yes.
So what you're trying to say is that the struggle deserves to be taken because it's an opportunity to practice all these skills, right? It's a struggle which brings us together. It's a struggle which can be a vehicle to.
Well, I think in essence we're talking about lack of adequate education for building a citizenship, in a sense. In schools, we do not actually learn how to build arguments. We don't learn to build associations, to use our freedoms, basic freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. On the contrary, in a sense, if we look throughout the country, we still find probably in a huge percentage of schools, young people entering the school on the back door or on the side door. For 12 years, what do you learn? You learn that you have to, you have an inferior position. Basically, if you're not even allowed to enter in a school that is meant for your education on the main door, what can you? I mean, it's a very subtle and small metaphor in a sense, but I think it is representative of a broader organizational culture that is rather, in fact, quite oppressive. And that actually destroys self-confidence and independence and the courage to actually use one's freedoms in that sense, or to use them for what is needed. I mean, we still have a democracy. This democracy will not remain a democracy unless citizens learn to hold power to account. And people who don't trust themselves, people who have been disciplined to obey authority, will very likely not have the ability or the courage or the self-confidence to hold anyone accountable, let alone go on global markets and be a productive part of a capitalist system that we're a part of, whether we like it or not.
That's true. Is this also related to the current political discussions and debates we're having, this shift towards populism or extreme right candidates? Is it also related to what you just mentioned?
I guess totally, I would say. I think if we do not even have the education to recognize the error of argumentation, we are very vulnerable in front of any kind of disinformation. Even if you are trained given how AI works and how these messages are constructed, you are still at quite high risk. So I do think we are extremely little prepared in the current hybrid war, which is relying quite a bit on disinformation, to actually have a citizenry that has the capacity to be resilient and defend itself against disinformation, misinformation, and various other kinds of campaigns, which are obviously a lot and targeted. And that support extreme right in a sense. So it's a question mark whether these campaigns are generated by the extreme right, which probably some are and some are not, but definitely they benefit the extreme right without doubt. And the kind of tensions and fear and struggles, in a sense, and polarization that is generated in society, I think puts the society in a position where, without the skills that we were discussing about, it really has no chance of actually remaining peaceful.
This is I've seen it mentioned in several studies as well. This local forms of organizations, which can resist. It seems a bit easier than the bigger ones to the change of the political landscape, to the shift. Do you have the same feeling? Do you have the same impression?
Partially, unfortunately. Just partially. I don't think there is a bulletproof solution for these things. I think I think it's more complicated than that. But it definitely being active, being interested, practicing your skills in I don't know, discussing community issues and so on, being informed about potential solutions, and also learning about what others did and so on. So all these aspects, I think, lead to people being more, thinking more critically, asking more questions, not believing, basically, a lot of the messages that are obviously fake and constructed and are not true. Without questions, we do not seek truth, basically. And in this moment, truth, some sort of truth, is it's a big. I don't think we want to have necessarily a philosophical discussion about truth, but I do think truth is important, and unfortunately, we are just not very well positioned to, as a society, to deal with these questions.
Not even when we talk about, let's say, younger generation, our generation, the middle one, or the generation which is our parents. Not even when we talk about this distinctions, not even the younger generation.
I do think we see an improvement in this direction. We have older and younger people who are critically minded, and they discuss with people around, and so on and so forth. So I do think that a large part of the society has these skills, in a sense. The challenge probably is that it's not large enough. Especially as we are before elections, in elections numbers matter. So it depends who is voting and what these votes are for. And until recently, Romania was quite in a good position because we didn't have an extremist option. So actually there was a part of the electorate that was not represented. Now there are multiple options, and we see the consequences.
Was it that we didn't have the extremist option, or that it was also part of the mainstream parties? And that's my reading, actually, of it. Because it was there. Some of the leaders were quite visibly, on this side. But they were somehow also, kept under the table, under the radar, in a way where...
Definitely there was some overlap, and some of the main parties were trying to get the attention of this electorate. But I think there weren't outright extremist parties, fascist parties, etc., as we have today, in a sense. So this is a new, I think, it's rather a new moment in history, in the history of this country.
In the recent one, yeah, because we had our history, right, with.
Exactly. So so I think this is something different than before. I think it's also for the first time when we have an outright anti-EU, anti-NATO, anti-Western political force that is significant and has the chances actually to derail the current trajectory of the country.
Yeah, and that includes anti-immigrants. This is, again, one of the first time I've seen it mentioned, by, let's say, one of the main candidates. I mean, it is because they are going to the second round of elections. Let me ask you, you work with a lot of foreign colleagues on various researcher projects. How do you explain this to them? I bet you received a lot of questions related. I also did, and I mean, I think everybody in our group of colleagues working with international colleagues received the same. And I also have seen that you had several interventions in mass media. How do you explain this? Which is your personal interpretation? Let's call it like this. Yeah.
Okay, so I do think there are a few macro, if I can call them this way, macro reasons for us being here. So I do think that the first aspect relates to exactly our earlier discussion. The educational sector, we've had a lot of reforms in education, but in terms of organizational culture, I would claim our current system still produces the pedagogical ideal of a communist new person, new man, woman, rather than a citizen for a democratic system. And I think this has a lot to do with the organizational culture in schools. It has to do a lot with the curriculum, the substance of the curriculum. We've seen a lot of modifications. I don't know, we do how many classes. We have a 0 grade and the 9th grade should be 4. So a lot of cosmetic modifications in a sense, but the substance, the values that the system transmits to the next generation, there has been no change almost in that. We still have, and my personal experience, at least with high school students, by the end of the 12th grade, a huge percentage of the young students, they are bored. Basically, they are bored. They don't have motivation, and they are ready basically just to follow orders in a sense. And I think that's still the reality, unfortunately. And I think that's the biggest problem in a sense. Had we done something else in this direction, we would not have a lot of the other challenges. Now, going to the other challenges, since this one, is there. A big challenge has been the decision, I think, to the core development decision for Romania's economy, in a sense. I think it was economically a good decision. We have this development plan around growth poles and the big cities, which I think economically it makes sense. Politically, as we see, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And now we're suffering the consequences. What we created basically as a country in the last decades is a huge inequality.
And that's exactly what we talked a few days ago, right? When you go to the Cluj city center, right?
Exactly. So there is inequality between big towns and small towns and rural areas. And this discrepancy is just hard not to see, and it's very easy for political forces to exploit it. So this could be all, I mean, I think this model needs another 15-20 years for actually the economy to encompass other areas that are not as developed as the main cities with proper policies. Because, sometimes if big cities are well resourced, they can also monopolize political decisions and policy. So it's a struggle. But now definitely we have an extreme right party that has actually built their campaign exactly on this discrepancy, and it's actually mobilizing people against this model and against the democracy directly and indirectly in a sense. So this is the second part for me, this inequality, which was by design. Now, very important, I think, to mention, however big this inequality is, I would still argue that rural areas and small towns are better today than 20 years before. So I think there has been some improvements, maybe not everywhere, but by and large, in the condition of small towns and rural areas. So
it's rather very recent, as you mentioned. So we see development funds coming to the small urban areas and to the rural ones, but really recent, right?
Not really. I mean, I think we've seen this for a long time, for at least 1.5 to 2 decades. But it with certain other conditions, the quality of the mayor, capacity to attract EU funds, and so on. We have villages that have done this for 20 years. Yeah. So definitely the opportunities were there. The local conditions for using the opportunities were not always there. And there were no policies put in place actually to force development solutions for rural areas and small towns. So the third part, which I think is more complicated and but very important, I think what we're seeing is a failure of the EU in a sense, and this is very unfortunate, obviously, I think for everyone, but the way enlargement happened, I think we're now seeing the consequences of a failure in enlargement policies. So I do hope Commission officials are listening to our discussion, because I think this is the failure of the Commission to a large extent, and the inability of the Commission to actually connect to the local realities in the member states, and the lack of openness to actually engage with society, with people.
So this is
I can explain.
Yeah, please.
So enlargement appeared in our lives, in a sense, after a regime change. Luckily, we had a regime change, from my perspective at least. I know this is today a disputed aspect. I would say we were extremely lucky. Now, the Commission had a certain approach, and Western member states had a certain approach to the newly democratic countries from Central Eastern Europe. I think that there is a big problem with this approach. There is a very big gap in this approach, in that it does not look at the actual condition of the countries that are aspiring to become EU member states. One cannot, in my view at least, look at countries that have come out of totalitarianism, for decades of totalitarianism, as brand new out-of-the-box countries that are ready to tick boxes and embark on EU integration, acquis communautaire, and a market economy. So there was a huge misreading, basically, of where the societies and their institutions were in the 90s. And there was no proper processing of what did it mean to have lived through decades of totalitarianism. I think the result has been some policies that are rather superficial, that focus on the bureaucratic aspects, which are super important. I'm not saying they shouldn't be part of such a process, but it lacked political vision, and it lacked the political strength to actually inspire people to be Europeans. So in a sense, we have basically thrown the dignity of Central Eastern European peoples away, together with their communist regimes. And this is again something that the extreme right is feeding off, both in Eastern and Western Europe, and we can explore this further. Because this process, somehow another part which I feel is rather naive, is to well, we had EU 15 before these countries joined. We had a lot of focus on enlargement on the newer member countries, but we had almost no process in the older EU member states. The assumption, I don't know what exactly was the assumption there, because obviously an EU of 27 or 28 states would not be the same as an EU of 15 states. And the populations in the EU 15 would have needed, in my perspective, a lot of support to understand what it means that a huge number of primarily former communist countries would join the club. Who are these people? What is their culture? What is their problem? Why are there so many such people in our communities? Etc. So in a sense, the Western societies have not been prepared. The Eastern societies didn't matter in this enlargement process. But they do matter politically, and this is exactly what we see. The extreme right in Central and Eastern Europe feeds off this imposition of Brussels, talking about Brussels as a colonial institution, as if it's not us who are in Brussels. I mean, that's completely insane in a sense. Looking at Brussels as if we're not part of the mechanism. We are part of the mechanism. We're not the most influential in all the time or in all policies, but we do play a role. We vote. We are at the table.
We have a place at the table, yeah.
And that is super important. We have a voice. If we're not influential enough, we should do our homework and become more influential. Nobody's stopping us to do that.
That's true.
Similarly, and I stop with this, in Western Europe, extreme right, and we can look at Brexit. There is academic literature showing how some of the important arguments in the Brexit debates were about the Polish and Romanian migrants. And there is, I would claim, although nobody seems to be talking open about it, but there is a discrimination of Central and Eastern European peoples in Western European countries. Well, I mean, obviously this is not a successful EU integration process. So we should really just have the courage to look at where things are and do something about it. I do think most of these countries want to be together. They want to be democratic still. And unless we stick together and we figure out how we can do that, then we will just not be together for very long.
Yeah, and strictly related, and that's a wonderful point. I didn't heard it mentioned and discussed very much. So thank you for highlighting it. Do we do the same mistakes now with the Republic of Moldova and all the other candidates? Do you see?
Yes, totally.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That's my impression as well. But
absolutely, it is an unfair, partially criticism. It is very unfair to expect of a bureaucracy to perform at the political level. So here we need the European Parliament, we need the Council, we need member state politicians to actually provide a vision for a united Europe. It is primarily a political failure. It is politicians and civil society as well. I mean, it's a societal failure, but from a political perspective, we have. It's a little bit sad. We have reached back into our past to bring focus on a Romanian identity that has been fake in a sense and constructed by communists, a totalitarian regime, which is, we all know it's fake in a sense, but we still go back to that instead of actually building a European identity together with the other European countries. Obviously, after 4 decades of totalitarianism, a regime that played with rewriting histories, with remodeling cities, putting ideology in everything, in how buildings are built, in how streets are built and others are demolished, into everything, into how school is run and everything. So obviously, that there is a lot of fake elements that were put by a regime that wanted to control populations. I'm not sure how one can believe a regime that had a Securitate that monitored almost everyone, how that could be better than what we're living today. It's in my mind, it's just I just
Too
cannot
much.
process. I cannot process that. But I think that there are so many question marks around this idea of a Romanian identity that comes out of communism that we should be asking. And it's normal in a sense that we revert back to what we know. But it is the responsibility of all of us, politicians, civil society, citizens, to open spaces where we discuss about this identity. This is not, we don't just build identity, I don't know, with bricks and mortar. You basically need open spaces for people to discuss about themselves. We have a past which is deeply traumatic. The communist regime has destroyed the Romanian culture by and large. The previous, it has wiped away an entire strata of the society. You cannot. We had labor camps. We had a lot of
written history, right?
We had prisons. We had a lot of people tortured, from young people to elderly, for political reasons. You cannot.
Millions of people forced to exile, right?
As well. Unfortunately, not enough, because many of them were killed or whatever. Yes. We would be much better off if we had a 56 like the Hungarians, where these thousands and thousands of people would still be alive somewhere else in the world. Maybe that's
and connected to the
Exactly. So in a sense, this leaves deep traumas for people in families, in communities, and without open processes where we address these traumas, where we collectively heal, we haven't had any healing process. It sounds a bit, I guess, not rough enough for the Romanian identity in a sense, especially from a masculine perspective. But we go to the hospital to get better. So I think healing is part of our lives. We should think of our psychological well-being and our, even spiritual well-being in a sense. We need healing in these directions as well. And having experienced so traumatic parts of history, we won't be able to build much without a proper healing process in place.
Let me ask you maybe a very strange question. Do you know any example of societies who've been to similar traumas, collective traumas as Romania during communism and maybe in the 90s during the first years of transition, where the healing process was successful? Do you have anything in mind? And with that one, I would ask you again something about your experience of living in Hungary. I know Hungary was a few years before us in terms of sliding towards the extreme right. Is there anything we can learn from their experience? Is there anything you saw it happening there, and then re-happening in the Romanian context a bit later? Yeah.
Okay, on the first question, yes, there are countries that have had a more of an healing approach to their past, and there horrible things happen everywhere. Yeah. Unfortunately, we unfortunately make horrible things happen as people, and the fact is that every people made horrible things happen for others and for themselves. This is history. We have to deal with it. I'm thinking primarily now, and I don't think there is ideal case. There are ideal cases. I think traumas are extremely difficult to overcome, especially collective traumas. But even the process of trying to address such traumas, I think, is extremely important, and we are not even at that level. But we do have countries, for example, Rwanda has been through a horrible genocide in the early 90s. And then they have put in place, they have some traditional courts called gacaca that they have used to sort of bring together the victims and perpetrators of crimes, and have people, have a process of healing of some sort. I think it's complicated culturally speaking. I mean, they had in their culture such a type of a court. We don't have such things. We do have churches. We have I guess, certain values around being welcoming, being forgiving people. Probably it falls back on the religious underpinnings of our culture in one way or another. But it doesn't mean that we cannot build processes. So I think we've learned that we can build processes. The fact that we have some sort of a functional democracy still, that shows that we have built processes. The fact that we have communities that are flourishing in certain ways, that's also shows that we've been. So I think we've done a lot of amazing things. I think in terms of, if we look at globally, I mean, the way Romania and other countries in the regions have transformed in the last decades is quite spectacular.
Yep.
And despite the general propaganda about being upset that we're not rich enough, or that somebody's richer than us, or that this democracy is not good enough, I think people should be aware that it's not so easy to build quality institutions.
Yep.
And that most countries do not actually succeed. What we have achieved in global comparative perspective is fabulous, from where I stand at least.
Yeah.
And we should learn also to celebrate, but also to potentially talk about what could strengthen this democracy rather than throwing it away.
So coming back to my previous question about Hungary, we've been there for a while. I mean, together in the sense that we intersected there, and I already saw it was in the beginning of 2010, 11, 12, 13, when I already saw the sliding kind of towards the extreme right in Hungary. And I'm very curious if there is anything we can learn from this experience that Hungary already passed through, and if there is anything we can learn and maybe try to avoid the mistakes they did in a sense. You've been living there for how long? Was it a decade?
I was based there, almost.
Not almost, yeah.
Not really. I was based there for 7 years, but I also lived in other parts during the time. So I do think we cannot escape this.
Do you think, really?
Sorry to be so pessimistic, because I do think what we've seen in Hungary 15 years ago, and in Brexit almost 10 years ago, I think this is part of a broader phenomenon, which is not about Romania in a sense. In my view, at least, this is part of a broader fight between autocracies and democracies, which I think is, I mean, there are a lot of cues and a lot of events that show that this fight is there in a sense. So we I think we have whatever we call hybrid war, in my perspective at least, is related to this attempt of autocratic countries to undermine democracies, and they are extremely successful. So and every new country lost for democracy is it's a net contributor to the autocratization efforts. And I think that unless we recognize this hybrid war and we build some sort of commensurate response to it, I don't think democracy stand a chance. And
because it's very unequal, the type of war, it's very asymmetric.
Because basically, I mean, what we're seeing at the moment is that there is a violent war in Ukraine, and we see European policies a lot focused on rearmament and increasing the defense industry. Which I would say it's a rational decision. Obviously, if you have a war on your doorstep, you do something like that. That's good. At the same time, So basically what I'm trying to say that in military terms, the decisions we take seem to be somehow commensurate. We look at the how many soldiers Russia has, how many tanks, we want to produce so
much.
that we are balancing basically the Russian power in a sense. We're not doing the same when it comes to hybrid war. And for me, that raises an important question mark. What if we produce all this military arsenal and then we just have extreme right governments in power that are friends with Putin?
Which already happened, right?
It's there. So will this be a success? From my perspective, it would not be a success. So that's what I'm saying. It's not the military power that puts extreme right people in power in democratic countries today. It's rather this hybrid war, which is relying on quite, I would say, more and more extensive infrastructure that is capable of basically taking over the communication space in democracies with various kinds of misinformation, disinformation campaigns. There are various kinds of messages making people dissatisfied, making people aggressive, frustrated, and an amazing match with some political forces that know exactly what messages to have to ride this wave. So, and we can see the same in France. We can see the same in Romania, in Germany. We can see these extremist parties supporting each other. I'm not sure what kind of evidence more we would need to actually face the reality. I mean, it's not a nice reality to face, but I think it's just screaming in our face. So I do feel that from this perspective, we definitely do not have a commensurate response. If certain countries build factories of trolls and build channels of constant targeting of groups of in our population with certain messages, we have no commensurate capability to counter these messages or to reciprocate. And basically what this means to me is that we basically surrender our democracies without even trying to defend them. And I think this is where we are.
Except for, and maybe this is the positive kind of light here, we have the Baltics maybe already recognizing this type of new war, or not necessarily new, but for our newer democracies is quite new, and they're already doing something. Is it do you have the same impression?
I think they're doing something more than the others, but I do think that there are some fundamental systemic problems and philosophical problems, actually, in a sense, political philosophy, theory of democracy problems. One of them relates to freedom of speech. And I think we've been hearing a lot about, oh, your democracy is not good enough, your freedom, you should give the freedom of speech on the social media channels. We want freedom of speach.
The type of Elon Musk argument, right?
Potentially, many others as well. This is extremely interesting because from a democratic perspective, that would sound, yes, it's democracy to have freedom of speech. And I fully agree with the freedom of speech. So I'd be probably the last person to argue against it. But I think there are some important questions to ask. Who is entitled to this freedom of speech? Who do we have a responsibility to ensure that there is some sort of fairness in how this freedom of speech is articulated? Meaning, can I, Stefan, have my freedom of speech, but then can I compete with the farm trolls? Troll farms, sorry. Can I compete with the troll farms? Can I do I have any chance of actually having my voice heard in this sea of disinformation and misinformation? So I think the important question here is who should have this freedom of speech? We do not have in the current conceptual frame of democracy, in a sense, this sort of discrimination against different categories who should and should not have freedom of speech. We just assume everybody should have freedom of speech. We haven't encountered probably such content. Maybe we have, but we've forgotten. But this is an important element, in a sense. Should Putin have freedom of speech in Romania or not? And if anyone comes with a big arsenal onto your population's mindset, is that about freedom of speech or is that something else? And I think if we look from a security perspective to this, I think that brings more questions around the democratic framework. If the Russian army were at our borders, it would be insane not to call for a state of emergency and mobilize the population to fight. The fact that we have armies of trolls
It's exactly
on our minds every day, this doesn't seem to even trigger our attention. I mean, we're really not doing almost anything about it. I mean, like, we give some grants to some NGOs to fight disinformation. And yes, maybe some people in some institutions are looking at this. But in effect, I mean, if I look next to me in a small community like Făgăraș, what I see is basically no countering of these campaigns of disinformation. On the contrary, I see more and more people becoming vulnerable and taken over by disinformation campaigns. So I do think I think it's, if we are to analyze it from a more maybe academic perspective, I think it relates a lot to how democracy is conceived and how technology and the advancement of technology has an impact on democratic processes. And we are just very new in this game where tech and democracy have to coexist in this way. And we don't know what to do with these mechanisms in this context.
I mean, some of the regulations coming from the European Union, is it pointing, I think, towards this kind of regularization mechanism in a way or another? But you don't seem convinced of the.
Well, I think we're looking, I mean, I think it's hard not to observe what's going on. I think, as I said, I think things are just screaming at us. I just think that our response is extremely slow and not commensurate to the level of attack and threat. And I don't see a wider collaboration between civil society, security institutions, political institutions to actually have a chance to win this fight. So far, in my perspective, we are just surrendering based on the actions we are doing to date.
I know that you mentioned COVID earlier a bit in the sense that you were also interested in that time what has happened with the civil society and society in general. Was this the trigger?
Well, that's a nice comparison in a sense, because COVID was an emergency situation which was also screaming at us. But in that context, a lot of people mobilized. It was also an amazing context for disinformation, and it was really well used in that direction as well. But I think I have seen communities really mobilizing to defend the communities from this virus, in a sense. People build donation campaigns, buying ventilators. We have, like, for example, community foundations calling left and right to buy supplies and ventilators and so on, finding things from China to wherever in the world to be shipped to Făgăraș, for example. So it's been a fabulous experience in terms of mobilization in the community to deal with an emergency situation. I think that was fabulous. I think the mobilization in the case of Ukraine also was really more powerful than most people expected. The fact that people themselves just thought that is unjust and went to help other people, that I think shows a lot. So I do think it's a nice comparison between recognizing in an emergency and doing something about it, and not recognizing another emergency and not doing much about it. And it is a difficult context because this hybrid war is now so deeply connected to the political sphere in Romania and in all these countries that that's why I think we are just simply surrendering, because we have several extreme right government in power, prime ministers from extreme right parties in Europe, and we have a couple of elections coming up, and in most of these elections, the extreme right is consolidating their position by and large. So if you look at the maps, just look at the maps in Germany, in Romania after these recent elections, and it's definitely I don't think we've European democracies. I don't think they've probably had such a challenge since the 30s.
You also mentioned this autocracy versus democracy war, and that some countries passed from one to another. I hear this question very often: why should we care about the type of society or the type of community in which we are living? Why does it matter if it's democracy or autocracy? What would be your message, to someone maybe young, not necessarily with a background in political science or really interested in the political life? Why should we care about it?
Well, I think there are a zillion reasons in a sense, but I think the most important reason, let me put this differently. I think if one is asking themselves such a question, I would do one of the following things. I would visit Jilava, I would visit Auschwitz, I would visit these places that were basically killing people, and that tell a story that we sometimes cannot even imagine, about how people like us treated other people like us. The beauty of democracy is that the chances for something like that to happen is very small. With non-democratic forms of government, you never know in which camp you'll be, and you always can switch camps very quickly. So if one still asks these questions after visiting these places, then we could have a debate. But I am convinced that people will not have such questions if they really understand what totalitarian regimes have done in the past. And we do have political forces today that make direct reference to exactly the people and parties committing crimes a few decades ago. So these are crimes. I mean, it's hard to build empathy where there is no empathy, in a sense. But a crime is a crime, and the arbitrariness of these regimes is, I think, what should persuade everyone, because you never know when you're next.
Yeah, I know you're also very active on the international scale. You've been traveling to and working on various countries like Africa and regions like Africa and so on. Do you see the same type of debate and social change ongoing in the societies as well, or it's only let's say a rather European or Western Europe thing? So no, it's happening on a global scale.
Yeah, I think it's a global phenomenon.
So which goes, in all kind of areas, and
in the African context, it also combines with various kinds of actual war. So in many countries, the situation is even more complicated, because the same forces that for us are up to now just pushing propaganda, they are actually involved in also in actual fighting, and that makes things even more complicated. I think we are in a very privileged position still. If we manage to preserve our democracy, it will be very much to our benefit.
Yeah. Stefan, thank you so much for coming to the episode and for the very wonderful discussion. Thank you, Stefan, for being here today with us. It was a wonderful discussion about community level organizations, but also the hybrid world that several societies, including Romania, are currently experiencing, and what can we do about it.